The first thing to hit the floor was a leather-bound book, its cover faded by time. It did not fall on its own. It was swept from the shelf by the arm of a man who, in all of his 33 years of life, had never once been denied anything. The second book fell after it, then the third. Then an entire row of books came crashing down like a line of broken dominoes, their spines split open, their yellowed pages scattering across the wooden floor. The ink bottle on the table tipped over, and the black liquid spread slowly, like a wound that couldn't be made to stop bleeding. 4 men in black suits stood along the wall. Not one of them moved, and the woman behind the cashier's counter? She did not scream. She did not beg. She did not step back even half a pace. She only stood there, her amber eyes fixed directly on the man, destroying everything she had, with a silence so heavy that it forced him to stop. Behind the old curtain, a small figure was hiding, 5 years old, curly hair, holding a worn stuffed rabbit tightly, lips trembling as the child fought back a sob. But the tears couldn't be held back. Reed Calloway stood in the middle of the wreckage. He lifted his head and looked into the woman's eyes. She was not afraid of him, and that unsettled him more than any threat ever could. He turned and walked out, thinking he had won. He did not know that only 3 hours later, in the hospital room where his father lay, he would see a photograph in the medical file. The woman who had donated an organ to save his father's life 2 years earlier. A face exactly like the girl in the bookshop, her mother. And Reed would come to understand one thing. There are debts that cannot be repaid with money, and there are mistakes that cannot be corrected with power. Press like if you want to know what happens next. Share this with someone who needs to remember that kindness is never forgotten. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the stories still waiting for you. The door of the SUV slammed shut behind him. Reed Calloway lowered himself into the leather seat, his eyes fixed straight ahead, though he was not truly seeing anything. His hands rested on his thighs, and he realized they were trembling slightly. Not from fear. Reed Calloway did not know what fear was. He had faced the barrel of a gun, enemies who wanted him dead, even long nights when he did not know whether he would live to see the next morning. But never had his hands trembled like this, and he did not understand why. The vehicle pulled away, leaving behind the old street where the little bookshop still stood with the wreckage he had just caused. Yet no matter how much distance grew between them, he couldn't drive the image from his mind. Amber eyes. A silence as heavy as stone. The way she had stood there without retreating, without shaking, without begging, even as he destroyed everything she had. Why was she not afraid? The question kept circling through Reed's mind like a melody he couldn't escape. He was used to seeing fear in the eyes of others. He lived by that fear. He had built an empire upon that fear. But that woman had looked at him as though he were nothing at all, as though he were only a passing wind, causing a little disturbance before disappearing. That made him angry. Or was it unease? He was no longer sure. The phone in his jacket pocket began to vibrate. Reed glanced at the screen and saw Vince's name. He answered, "Boss." Vince's voice was clipped, as always. "We have a problem. Sterling Cross just sent men to the hospital. They were asking about Mr. Harrison's condition." Reed felt his jaw tighten. Sterling Cross. The name cut through his dull headache like the edge of a knife. Cross controlled the eastern side of the city, and for a long time he had been eyeing Reed's territory. His father being in the hospital was not news Cross should have known. But in this world, no secret stayed hidden forever. "Double the security," Reed said, his voice as cold as steel. "No one gets into my father's room without my permission. Even the doctors are to be checked first." "Understood, boss." "And Vince." Reed paused for a beat. "If Cross sends men again, I want to know who they are before they even make it out of the hospital." The call ended. Reed looked out the car window. The city streamed backward in blurred streaks of color. Towering buildings, crowded streets, all of it belonging to him in one way or another. Reed Calloway, 33 years old, the man who controlled half the city. He held in his hands deals worth millions of dollars, men ready to die at his command, secrets that could bring even the most powerful families to ruin. He had risen from the ashes his father left behind when illness brought the old man down, and he had preserved that empire through ruthlessness without mercy. But today, a woman in an old bookshop had looked at him as though none of it meant a thing. Reed leaned his head back and closed his eyes. He told himself she was only a small obstacle, a piece of land that needed to be bought, a problem that needed to be solved. He would find another way. He would force her to sell in ways she couldn't refuse. He was Reed Calloway. He always found a way. But deep inside, in the place he never allowed anyone to touch, Reed knew he was lying to himself, because the image of those amber eyes would not disappear simply because he wanted it to, and the broken sobs of the child behind the curtain would follow him into his dreams tonight. The SUV turned onto the road leading to the hospital. Reed had a father waiting for him, and an enemy lurking in the shadows. As for that little bookshop, he would return. Soon, the wooden door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the silence of the bookshop. The growl of the SUV engine faded into the distance, then disappeared into the restless noise of the city outside. All that remained was stillness and ruin. June Whitmore still stood behind the cashier's counter, both hands gripping the edge of the oak so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. During the entire time that man had been tearing her shop apart, she had not trembled. She had not cried. She had not taken a single step back. But now, with him gone, with no one left before whom she had to remain strong, June allowed her body to shake. Her knees weakened, and she had to cling to the counter to keep from falling. Her breathing came fast and broken, as if she had just run a marathon rather than stood motionless for the past 10 minutes. She closed her eyes and tried to steady herself. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. She was used to this by now, used to standing upright when everything around her collapsed, used to being strong when there was no one left to lean on. For the past 4 years, since her ex-husband walked away, she had been forced to learn how to be a rock for her daughter. And for the past 2 years, since her mother died, she had been forced to learn how to be a rock for herself. June opened her eyes and looked down at the floor of the shop. Books lay scattered everywhere like leaves after a storm. Broken spines, yellowed pages strewn in every direction, and the black stain of ink was still spreading slowly across the wooden floor, like a wound that would not stop bleeding. She released the counter and slowly knelt down. Her hand reached for a leather-bound book, the first one swept from the shelf. Its spine had cracked, but the pages inside were still intact. She ran her fingers gently over the split, as softly as if she were soothing an injury on living flesh. This was her mother's favorite book, an old edition of Jane Eyre, its brown leather cover worn smooth by time, its pages yellowed and carrying the unmistakable scent of old paper. Her mother used to say that every book had a soul, and the soul of this one was resilience. Now it rested in June's hands, wounded but not destroyed. Mother. The tiny voice came from behind her. June turned and saw Willa standing at the edge of the curtain, her eyes red, tear tracks still glistening on her cheeks, her arms wrapped tightly around her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Buttons. The little girl ran to her and threw herself into her mother's arms, her small hands clinging tightly around June's neck. Mother, grandmother's books. Those men ruined them all. Willa's voice broke, and her small body trembled in her mother's embrace. June held her close, one hand stroking the chestnut curls of her daughter's hair, her voice calm and warm even as her heart was breaking apart. It's all right, sweetheart. Books can be repaired. I will mend every one of them. She kissed the top of Willa's head and breathed in the familiar scent of children's shampoo. Were you frightened? Willa nodded, her face still buried in her mother's shoulder. Those men were so mean. I was afraid they would hurt you. June held her more tightly. They will not hurt me, and they will not come back. You don't need to worry. She said it, but deep down she knew it might have been a lie. That man, Reed Calloway, would return. Men like him always returned. They did not accept refusal. They did not understand the meaning of no. June remembered the final afternoon with her mother, 2 years earlier, just before the last time she was admitted to the hospital. Catherine Whitmore had been lying in the old armchair in the bookshop, her body wasted by illness, but her eyes were still bright and gentle. She had held her daughter's hand, her voice weak but resolute. Hold on to this shop, June. It is not only books. It is the soul of our family. It is the place your grandmother built with her own 2 hands. It is the place where I grew up. It is the place where you first made your memories with books. She had paused, struggling for breath, then continued. And remember, my dear, kindness is never lost. It only travels in circles. June had not understood what her mother meant at the time. She often said things like that, words layered with meaning that June only came to understand long afterward. But she had made a promise. She had promised that she would keep the bookshop, no matter what happened. Willa had grown calmer now. She sat on the floor and began helping her mother gather the books. June looked at her daughter, then around the shop. Her gaze came to rest on the work table in the corner, where a stack of bills lay waiting. Her mother's hospital expenses, the rent, electricity and water, food for herself and her daughter. The numbers kept piling on top of one another like stones pressing down on her shoulders every single day. She could sell the shop. That man, Reed Calloway, had offered a sum she knew was many times greater than the true worth of this place. She could sell it, pay off every debt, and begin again somewhere else. That would have been the sensible thing. That was what anyone in her position would have done. But June couldn't. To sell this shop would mean selling her mother's soul, selling the only inheritance that 3 generations of women in her family had built together, selling the only place where she still felt that her mother remained beside her. June rose to her feet, lifted Willa into her arms, and set her on the cashier's counter. "Sit here while I get the cleaning things." Willa nodded, holding Mr. Buttons against her chest. June looked once more at the black stain on the floor. It had stopped spreading, but the blot remained, dark and ugly against the pale wood, like a scar, like so many other scars life had left upon her. She whispered so softly that only she herself could hear it. "I will not give up, Mother, no matter what happens." Mercy General Hospital at night carried a kind of stillness that was almost unsettling. The hallways were long and stark white, washed in the cold glow of fluorescent lights, with the faint scent of antiseptic drifting through the air. Reed Calloway walked quickly past the 2 bodyguards, standing watch at the end of the corridor, gave them a slight nod, then pushed open the door and stepped into the room. It was a large private room, fitted with every comfort money could buy, yet no comfort could conceal the truth that the man lying in the bed was growing weaker with each passing day. Harrison Calloway, 62 years old, once the most feared man in this city, now looked thin and pale against the white hospital sheets. The machines around him gave off their steady signals, tracking every heartbeat, every breath. Reed stood in the doorway for a moment, watching his father sleep. Each time he came here, the old man seemed a little thinner, a little weaker, and each time, Reed felt a little more helpless. He could buy this entire city if he wanted to, but he couldn't buy more time for his father. Harrison opened his eyes, as though he had sensed his son's presence. He gave a faint smile, one that made the lines in his face seem deeper. "Son, why do you look so tense?" Reed pulled a chair closer to the bed, sat down, and took his father's frail hand in his own. "It is nothing. Just work." His voice was softer than usual, trying to hide everything spinning through his mind. The bookshop, the amber eyes, Sterling Cross. None of those things belonged in this room. Harrison looked at him with the knowing gaze of a man who had lived too long in darkness, not to recognize when someone was hiding something. But he did not ask any further questions. Instead, he looked up at the ceiling, his voice low and distant. 2 years ago, when I was close to dying, someone gave me a second chance. Reed said nothing. He knew this story. 2 years earlier, his father's liver had begun to fail, and there had been no suitable donor on the waiting list. The doctors had said he had only a few weeks left. Then, one day, as if by a miracle, they found an anonymous donor. That person had been a perfect match for Harrison, and the surgery had saved his life. They did not want gratitude. Harrison continued, his voice growing softer. They did not want anything. No money, no name, nothing at all. They simply gave, as though my life was worth their sacrifice without asking for anything in return. He paused, breathing with difficulty. Sometimes I wonder whether I deserved that sacrifice. I did many wrong things, Reed, far too many, perhaps more than you know. Reed tightened his hold on his father's hand. You deserved it. His voice was firm. You are my father. For me, that is enough. Harrison smiled, and his eyes slowly closed again. You are the only thing I ever did right in my life, son. Then he drifted back to sleep, his breathing settling into an even rhythm beneath the steady sounds of the machines. Reed remained there for a little while longer, watching his father sleep. Then he rose, preparing to leave. Just then, the door opened, and a nurse stepped inside, carrying a file. She set it on the table beside the bed, checked the readings on the machines, then hurried out again as though 100 other duties were waiting for her. The file lay on the table, clipped together unevenly, with part of the paperwork inside left exposed. Reed was about to call the nurse back and tell her to fix it, but his eyes happened to pass over what was showing. A photograph, and he froze where he stood. The face in the picture belonged to a middle-aged woman, somewhere in her 50s, with brown hair streaked with silver and deep eyes carrying an unmistakable calm. That face was so familiar that Reed's heart seemed to stop for a beat, not because he had ever met this woman, but because he had just met someone who looked exactly like her, only 20 years younger. He picked up the file, his hand trembling slightly. This was his father's anonymous donor file, one he should never have been allowed to see. But someone had been careless, and now it was in his hands. He read the name, Catherine Whitmore, anonymous organ donor, contact address, Whitmore and Words Bookshop. Reed sank into the chair behind him, his face drained of color. Whitmore, the bookshop, the woman with the amber eyes. All the pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed made him feel sick. He left the hospital like a shadow, moving quickly through the corridor without looking at anyone. The moment he got into the car, he called Vince. "I need everything on Catherine Whitmore. Everything, right now." His voice was cold and hard, but beneath it was something even he did not recognize. Fear. Not fear of someone or something. Fear of himself. Fear of what he had done. An hour later, the phone rang. Vince gave his report in his usual matter-of-fact tone, unaware that every word he spoke was driving another nail into the coffin of Reed's conscience. Catherine Whitmore died 2 years ago of heart failure. 1 week before her death, she registered as an organ donor. Her liver was a perfect match for Harrison Calloway. The only condition her family requested was absolute secrecy regarding the donor's identity. They wanted no money, no gratitude, nothing at all. Her only daughter, June Whitmore, 28 years old, is a single mother to a 5-year-old girl and is carrying a crushing burden of medical debt from her mother's treatment. She is currently living and working at Whitmore and Words Bookshop, the bookshop her family has built over 3 generations. Reed sat in the car, staring down at his own hands, the hands that had swept books from the shelves, the hands that had destroyed the legacy of the woman who saved his father's life. "Boss?" Vince's voice came through the phone. "You still there?" Reed did not answer. "Maybe not everyone has a price, boss," Vince added, and for once there was something unusual in his tone. Perhaps sarcasm, perhaps disappointment. Reed did not know, and he did not care. He ended the call and sat in the darkness of the car, parked in the hospital lot. That night, Reed Calloway did not sleep. He lay in bed in his penthouse, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling while the image of those amber eyes kept returning. But this time, they no longer filled him with anger or unease. They filled him with shame, a feeling Reed Calloway had thought he had forgotten a very long time ago. The next morning, Reed Calloway stood in front of Whitmore and Words Bookshop for the second time in less than 24 hours. But this time, everything was different. There was no convoy of gleaming black SUVs, no 4 men in suits standing along the walls. There was only him, alone, in a simple gray coat, standing on the sidewalk and staring at the old wooden door of the bookshop as though it were the gate to a place he did not know how to enter. He had been standing there for nearly 10 minutes already. A man accustomed to commanding hundreds of people, accustomed to facing the most dangerous enemies, now hesitating in front of a small bookshop. It was absurd. But Reed couldn't laugh. He drew in a deep breath, and then pushed the door open and stepped inside. Inside the shop, June Whitmore was kneeling on the wooden floor, her back to the door. She was carefully taping the spine of a torn book back together, her hands moving with a gentle patience as though she were tending to a living creature. Beside her, Willa sat cross-legged, helping her mother place the repaired books into a cardboard box. The little girl still held Mr. Buttons in her lap as though the stuffed rabbit were a protective charm she could never let go of. The black ink stain on the floor had been scrubbed clean, but it still left behind a faint mark, like a scar that could never be erased completely. The bell hanging over the door gave a soft ring when Reed entered. June lifted her head, and the moment she realized who was standing there, her body went still. She rose slowly to her feet, her eyes never leaving him, and when she spoke, her voice was cold as ice. "The shop is still not for sale." Reed remained where he was, not coming any closer. "I did not come to buy it." Silence. June looked at him, trying to read the intention hidden behind those cold gray eyes. He had not brought anyone with him. He did not carry the same violent edge he had worn the day before, but that did not mean he was not dangerous. Men like him were always dangerous, whether they carried a weapon or not. She stepped to one side, placing herself in front of Willa, the protective instinct of a mother stronger than any fear. "Then why are you here?" Her voice did not tremble, but her amber eyes were watchful, ready for whatever might come next. Reed looked at her, then down at the child peeking out from behind her mother, those wide eyes watching him with more curiosity than fear. He took a breath, and when he spoke, his voice had changed. It was no longer cold, no longer threatening. There was only weariness, and something close to surrender. I saw the file. At the hospital, your mother, Catherine Whitmore. She saved my father's life. The air itself seemed to go still. June did not move, and for the first time since Reed had met her, he saw something stir in those amber eyes. Not fear, not anger, but a deep pain buried for far too long, suddenly disturbed. You should not know that. Her voice was quieter now. The only condition my mother asked for was secrecy. How did you? Someone was careless, Reed cut in. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that I know now, and I know what I have done. He looked around the bookshop, at the shelves still standing half empty, at the torn books waiting to be repaired, at the faded stain of ink on the floor. He had caused all of this, to the daughter of the woman whose sacrifice had saved his father. June watched him, and she realized that his face looked different today. Yesterday, he had been like a wild beast, unable to control his rage. Today, he looked like a man who had just been shaken awake from a fever dream and had finally seen what he had done in his sleep. But that changed nothing. My mother believed that kindness doesn't need to be acknowledged. June's voice had grown calm again, though a note of sorrow lay deep beneath it. She did not want gratitude to become a burden on anyone. She only wanted to help, without asking for anything in return. She paused for a moment. That is why I kept it secret, and that is also why I cannot sell this bookshop. It is her legacy. It is the only thing of hers that I still have. Do you understand? Reed understood. He understood more than she imagined, because he, too, was trying to hold on to his father at any cost. I will pay off all of your medical debt, he said. I will restore the entire bookshop. I will redesign the project so this land is no longer needed. I will do whatever it takes to make amends. June shook her head, slowly but with finality. I don't want your money. I want you to leave this place, and leave us in peace. But, did you hear what I said? Her voice sharpened. My mother did not do what she did in order to be repaid, and I don't need you turning her sacrifice into a transaction. Please, just go. Reed stood in the middle of the bookshop, and for the first time in his life, he did not know what to say. He had negotiated with the most dangerous enemies. He had persuaded the most stubborn partners, but in front of this woman, with her amber eyes full of resolve and pain, he was utterly powerless. He gave a faint nod, turned, and walked toward the door. But before he pushed open the wooden door, he stopped and spoke without turning back. I will not force you to sell, but I will come back. Then he stepped outside, the door closing behind him, the bell giving one soft chime before falling silent. June stood there watching after him, unable to understand what he meant to do. He would come back? For what? To continue threatening her? Or to do something else? She did not know, and she was not sure she wanted to. Mother. Willa's voice came softly from behind her. June turned and looked at her daughter, whose small face was lifted with innocent curiosity. Mother. He looked sad. June did not answer. She only knelt down and drew her daughter into her arms, and wondered why a 5-year-old child could see the things grown adults tried so hard to ignore. The Eastern Industrial District at night was an entirely different world from the rest of the city. There were no blazing neon lights, no roar of traffic, only old warehouses lying motionless in the dark and the sound of wind whistling through rusted iron frames. In a warehouse at the end of the dirt road, a weak yellow light slipped through the gaps in the corrugated metal roof, like eyes peering out into the night. Inside, Sterling Cross sat at the head of a long wooden table, surrounded by 6 men with cold faces and wary eyes. Cross was 45 years old, his salt and pepper hair combed straight back, his angular face marked by a faint scar running along the left side of his jaw. His eyes were a cloudy gray, always carrying the chill of calculation, like a snake waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He had been waiting for this moment for a very long time, and now it was coming. Reed Calloway is distracted, Cross said, his voice low and deliberate, every word measured carefully before it left his mouth. His father has been in the hospital for 8 months. The old man's health grows weaker by the day. He has to divide his attention between running an empire and caring for his father. "This is the perfect time for us to strike." The men around the table nodded, but none of them dared speak while Cross was still talking. He hated being interrupted. One of his men, the one seated closest to him, cleared his throat and spoke. "Sir, we found something interesting." Cross lifted an eyebrow and motioned for him to continue. "Reed has taken an interest in a small bookshop on the old street. The shop is called Whitmore and Words." "A bookshop?" Cross repeated, his tone edged with suspicion. "Yes. He went there twice in 2 days. Alone. No bodyguards. The first time, he trashed the place, apparently trying to force the owner to sell. But the second time, he went alone, stood there talking to the woman who owns it, then left. No signs of violence. No signs of threats." Cross rested his chin on one hand, and his cloudy gray eyes lit up with interest. Reed Calloway, the coldest kingpin in the city, the man who never showed emotion, never let anyone see a weakness, suddenly taking an interest in a tiny bookshop and an ordinary woman. There was nothing ordinary about that. "Find out more," Cross ordered, a cold smile spreading across his lips. "Find out who that woman is, what connection she has to Reed, and why he cares about her. Every strong man has an Achilles heel. It seems we may finally have found Reed Calloway's." That same night, nearly half a city away from the Eastern Industrial District, Reed Calloway sat in a black sedan, parked across the street from Whitmore and Words bookshop. He had been sitting there for almost an hour, watching the lights inside the shop go out one by one. First, the lights on the ground floor, where the bookshop was. Then the lights on the second floor, probably the sitting room or the kitchen. At last, only a faint night light remained glowing in a small window, most likely the child's room, Willa. The little girl had eyes exactly like her mother's. The phone in Reed's jacket pocket began to vibrate. He looked at the screen, then answered. "Boss." Vince's voice came through. "Cross is making unusual moves. His men are watching you. They know you went to the bookshop twice." Reed did not look surprised. He had suspected this for some time. Cross had eyes and ears all over the city, and Reed never underestimated his enemies. "I know," he replied. "Then why do you keep coming here?" Vince asked, a note of concern in his voice. "Alone, without protection. If Cross wants to make a move, this is the perfect opportunity." Reed did not answer at once. He looked up at the second-floor window, where the nightlight was still glowing faintly. A single mother and a 5-year-old child were sleeping in there, unaware that their lives were being drawn into a war they knew nothing about. "Send men to watch this area," Reed said, quietly. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Don't let anyone suspicious get near the bookshop." "Boss." Vince hesitated. "Is she really that important? Important enough for you to take this kind of risk?" Reed was silent for a long moment, his eyes still fixed on the softly lit window. "It is not her," he said at last. "It is the debt I carry." He ended the call, started the engine, and drove off into the night. He did not know that on the other side of the city, Sterling Cross was smiling at the information he had just received. Cross was searching for Reed's weakness, and Reed had just, without meaning to, revealed a new one. The hidden war had begun, and the woman with the amber eyes and the little daughter sleeping peacefully in the bookshop had no idea that they had become pieces on a chessboard in a game they had never chosen to enter. In the first week after that meeting, June opened the bookshop one morning and found a middle-aged man waiting outside, standing beside a toolbox and several new wooden boards. He smiled politely and introduced himself as a carpenter who had been hired to repair the damaged bookshelves. June shook her head at once. "I did not hire anyone." "You have the wrong place." The carpenter scratched his head, looking embarrassed. "Miss Whitmore, I have already been paid in full, in advance. If you don't let me work, I still have to stand here all day." That is what he said. June did not need to ask who he was. She wanted to send the carpenter away, wanted to call Reed Calloway and tell him that she did not need his help. But then she looked at the crooked shelves, the broken wooden boards she had no money to replace, and she knew she was lying to herself. She did need help. She just did not want to accept it from the man who had caused the damage in the first place. But in the end, practicality won over pride. She stepped aside and let the carpenter enter. And for the rest of that day, she tried to behave as though he did not exist while he worked steadily, repairing each shelf one by one. The second week began with a wooden crate appearing in front of the shop. June opened it and found 5 antique books inside, rare editions that any lover of books would have coveted. a first printing of Wuthering Heights, a 19th century leather-bound copy of Pride and Prejudice, and 3 others whose value June knew could equal half a year's rent. There was no card, no note, but she knew where they had come from. She closed the crate and sent it back to Reed Calloway's address. The next day, the crate appeared again in front of the shop. Exactly as before, June sent it back once more, this time with a handwritten note. I already told you. I don't need anything from you. On the 3rd day, the crate returned yet again, but this time there was a folded note inside. The handwriting slanted slightly, sharp and controlled, unmistakably the hand of someone used to holding a pen with authority. I know, but these books deserve a worthy home. June stood at the doorway of the shop, the note in her hand, and she did not know what she was supposed to feel. Anger at his stubbornness, or reluctant admiration for a patience she had never imagined he possessed. She looked at the antique books, let out a quiet sigh, and this time she did not send them back. She left the crate in the corner of the shop, still undecided about what she would do with it. In the 3rd week, Reed came to the bookshop late one afternoon. June was busy helping a regular customer, a retired professor who often came by in search of history books, and she did not realize Reed had entered until she heard Willa's tiny voice from the corner of the room. You are the man who knocked over grandmother's books. June turned sharply, her heart beginning to race, but she couldn't break off her conversation with the professor. She could only remain where she was, trying to answer questions about a rare volume while straining to hear the exchange between her daughter and the man she still did not know whether she could trust. Reed had crouched down to Willa's height, and he did not try to avoid the little girl's wary gaze. Yes, he answered, his voice gentler than June had ever heard it. And I am very sorry for that. Willa tilted her head, her face thoughtful like a tiny philosopher weighing some great question. Grandmother said real regret means you have to make it right. I am trying, Reed answered. There was a brief silence. Willa looked at him, then asked a question June never would have expected. Do you know how to read books? Reed nearly laughed, and June realized it was the first time she had ever seen his face hold anything other than coldness or strain. Yes, he answered. Mother says every book has a soul, Willa went on, her tone solemn as though she were sharing a great secret. Do you know which one has the best soul? Reed lowered himself all the way down, no longer crouching but sitting on the wooden floor, as though a question from a 5-year-old child was worthy of his full attention. He was quiet for a moment, truly thinking, and at last he said, I don't know. Could you show me? Willa smiled, then got up and ran to a shelf in the corner. She pulled out an old leather-bound book, the one June knew more intimately than any other in the shop, her mother's copy of Jane Eyre, the book with the brave soul. This one belonged to grandmother, Willa said, holding the book out to read. She said it had a brave soul. Would you like to borrow it? June finished her conversation with the professor just in time to hear that question. She turned back, and the sight before her made her stop still for a moment. Reed Calloway, the Mafia kingpin who controlled half the city, was sitting on the floor of her bookshop, with both hands holding her mother's most beloved book, listening to her daughter talk about the souls of books with an attentiveness June had never seen in anyone. His face looked different. Gone was the coldness, the arrogance, the threat. He looked like an ordinary man, a man trying to understand a world utterly foreign to him. Willa glanced at her mother, her eyes brightening. Mother, this man wants to borrow grandmother's book. Is that all right? June walked closer and looked down at Reed sitting on the floor. He lifted his eyes to her, and in those gray eyes she saw a silent question. She hesitated. That book was the most precious thing her mother had left behind. She had never lent it to anyone. But then she looked at the way Reed held it, carefully and reverently, as though it were a fragile treasure, and she remembered something her mother used to say. Books are born to be read, not to lie forever on a shelf. She gave a small nod. Yes, only a single word. But it was the first time June Whitmore had ever said yes to Reed Calloway, and both of them knew exactly what that meant. That night there was no moon. The sky was black as though covered with a thick sheet of velvet, without a single star, without a single thread of light breaking through the heavy cloud cover. June sat behind the cashier's counter, the glow of the desk lamp casting a warm yellow light over the stack of bills spread out before her. Willa had been asleep upstairs for a long time, and the bookshop had sunk into the kind of silence broken only by the sound of June's pen moving across the page as she wrote down numbers. This month's rent, electricity and water, The unpaid hospital bills from her mother, Willa's nursery school tuition. The numbers seemed to dance before her eyes, red as blood, heavy as stone. She had tried her hardest, worked from morning until night, saved every dollar she could, but the money earned from this small bookshop was never enough. It had never been enough. June let out a quiet sigh and looked toward the window. The street outside was deserted, with only the street lamps flickering like tired eyes struggling to stay awake and keep watch over the night. Her gaze moved to the copy of Jane Eyre resting on the shelf Reed had sent a carpenter to repair, the book she had allowed him to borrow that afternoon. She still did not understand why she had agreed. Perhaps it was the way he had sat on the floor with Willa. Perhaps it was the look in his eyes when he held the book. Perhaps she was simply too exhausted to keep resisting. The sound of heavy footsteps outside pulled June from her thoughts. She looked up, every instinct in her sharpening at once. Those were not the footsteps of someone merely passing by. Those were the footsteps of people coming here. She had not even risen to her feet when the wooden door flew open. The crash of wood striking the wall exploded through the silence like a gunshot. 3 men rushed inside, their faces hard as stone, their eyes sharp as knives. They wore black coats, and the way they moved made it clear this was not the first time they had done something like this. June stood up, her heart pounding wildly, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "What do you want?" The man in front looked her up and down, a cold smile curving across his mouth. "Are you the woman Reed Calloway keeps visiting?" June did not answer. She neither confirmed nor denied it, but her silence was answer enough. "We are not going to hurt you," the man said, his tone edged with mockery. "We only came to deliver a message." Then he turned to the other 2 men and gave a small nod. They walked to the nearest bookshelf and swept their arms across it. Books crashed to the floor again, the sound painfully familiar. June wanted to scream, wanted to run forward and stop them, but her feet seemed nailed to the floor. She watched the books fall, watched the pages scatter, and it felt as though she were watching her mother's very soul being trampled all over again. But she did not look at the books. She looked toward the staircase leading upstairs, where Willa was sleeping. As long as they did not go up there, as long as they did not touch her daughter. The man in front stepped closer to June, close enough for her to smell cigarette smoke on his clothes. "Tell Calloway this is a warning from Sterling Cross. Next time it will not be this gentle." Then he turned away, signaled to the other 2 men, and they left as quickly as they had come. The door swung on its broken hinges, and the night wind rushed in, cold and sharp. Silence. June stood in the middle of the fallen books, and her body began to shake. First her hands, then her shoulders, then all of her. She listened for any sound from upstairs, praying that Willa had not woken, had not seen any of this. There was no sound. The little girl was still asleep. June let out a breath of relief, but her knees gave way, and she sank down onto the floor amid the scattered books. She wrapped her arms around her knees. She did not cry, but her body would not stop trembling. This was no longer about money or land. This was about her daughter's safety. Those men knew where she lived. They knew Reed came here, and they would come back. She looked at the telephone, resting on the counter, and hesitated. Call the police? She knew the police couldn't protect her from men like Sterling Cross. They would come, make a report, offer promises, then leave. And those men would return the moment the police were gone. Sell the shop and run? She had nowhere left to go. No family, no savings, nothing except this bookshop and her daughter. Or, she looked at the phone and thought of the man who had sat on the floor of her shop that afternoon, listening while her daughter spoke about the souls of books. The man who had sent a carpenter to repair the shelves, who had sent antique books 3 times in a row, who had looked at her with eyes full of regret. The man she still did not know whether she could trust. But at this moment, he was the only one who could help her. June picked up the phone, found Reed's number, and pressed call. "Hello?" His voice sounded drowsy, but it sharpened at once. "June? What happened?" She opened her mouth, meaning to say something calm, meaning to explain everything clearly, but instead, her voice broke, trembling and fragile in a way she hated. They came to the shop. There was 1 second of silence on the other end of the line. Then Reed's voice came back, cold and sharp as a blade newly honed. "Stay there. I am coming now." 15 minutes later, the sound of engines rose outside. Not 1 car, but 3. The damaged door was pushed open, and Reed Calloway stepped inside, with Vince and 2 other men behind him. He stopped in the doorway, and took in the books scattered across the floor, the broken door, and finally June, curled in on herself in the middle of the wreckage. In every encounter he had ever had with her, she had been strong, silent, but unyielding, never stepping back, no matter who stood before her. But now he saw her fragile, shaking, in need of protection, and that made him angrier than anything Sterling Cross had ever done to his empire. Cross had crossed a line that should never have been crossed, and he was going to pay for it. Reed stepped into the bookshop, his eyes sweeping across every corner of the room like a predator assessing the terrain. He checked the broken door, the toppled shelves, the windows, and the back entrance. Vince and the two men who had come with him stood guard outside, their eyes scanning the dark street. Reed turned back to June, who was still sitting on the floor in the middle of the scattered books. "What did they say?" he asked, his voice controlled, though there was an undercurrent of tension in it that seemed ready to erupt. June told him everything, from the moment they burst in to the moment they left. She tried to keep her voice steady, but her hand still trembled slightly when she spoke the name Sterling Cross. Reed listened, his expression unchanged, but his gray eyes grew colder with every word she spoke. When she finished, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Send 4 men here. Guard the place 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Keep it discreet, but don't let your attention slip. If anyone suspicious comes within 50 yards, I want to know immediately." He ended the call and looked at June. "From now on, there will be people protecting you and Willa." June rose to her feet, dusted off her trousers, and shook her head. "I don't need your protection. I have lived on my own for 4 years. I can take care of myself." Reed looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her stop. "This is not about you," he said, his voice softer than before. "This is about Willa." Her daughter's name rang through the silence like a bell. June turned to look toward the staircase, where the little girl was sleeping upstairs, unaware of everything that had just happened. She thought of her child's innocent face, of those large, curious eyes, of Mr. Buttons, the stuffed rabbit she held every night. If those men came back while Willa was awake, if they decided not to stop at delivering a message, June felt the blood in her veins turn cold. "All right," she said at last, her voice quieter now. "But only because of my daughter, not because of you." Reed nodded and did not argue. "The reason doesn't matter, as long as you are safe." He motioned for Vince to come inside and help clean up the wreckage, while he stayed with June. Together they gathered the fallen books and placed them back on the shelves in silence. When the shop was finally in order again, June made 2 cups of tea, and they sat at the cashier's counter, facing each other across the steaming mugs. Outside, the sky was still dark, but the air inside the shop no longer felt as tense as it had before. June looked down into her tea, then lifted her eyes to Reed. "What kind of man are you?" "Really?" The question hung between them. Reed was silent for a moment, as though weighing how he should answer. Then he looked into his tea and spoke, his voice low and slow. "I am a man who does bad things in order to keep what matters." June said nothing, waiting. "My father built this empire with violence," Reed continued. "I maintain it because I have to. There are people who want to take from us what we have, and I have to stop them. Sometimes through negotiation, sometimes through other means." He lifted his eyes to her. "I am not asking for your forgiveness. I only want you to understand." June looked at him, and she saw a weary man rather than a frightening kingpin. "I don't understand," she said honestly. "And I am not sure I want to understand your world." She paused, choosing each word with care. "But you kept your word. You did not force me to sell the shop. You sent someone to repair the shelves. You sent the antique books." She looked into his eyes. "And you are here at 2:00 in the morning because I called." There was a moment of silence. "So, I don't know what kind of man you are, but I know what you are trying to do." Reed said nothing, but something in his eyes changed. A small glimmer, like a candle flame trembling in the dark. They sat there until the sky began to pale, speaking little, yet the silence between them was no longer heavy as it had once been. It carried a strange kind of ease, as though they had crossed some invisible boundary together. The next morning, Reed went to the hospital to see his father. He had not slept after leaving the bookshop, and exhaustion marked his face when he entered Harrison's room. The old man was sitting propped against his pillows, staring out the window, but he turned at once when he heard his son's footsteps. "You look different, Reed." Harrison said, his aged eyes still as sharp as ever. What happened? Reed sat down beside the bed, intending to say it was nothing, as he always did. But then he looked at his father, looked at the man who had taught him everything he knew, and decided to tell the truth. Someone attacked a person I am trying to protect. Sterling Cross's men. Harrison nodded slowly, not looking surprised. The woman from the bookshop? Reed looked at his father, unable to hide his astonishment. Harrison gave a faint smile, one that deepened the lines in his face. I am old, son, but I am not blind. You come to see me less often now, but your eyes are brighter each time you do. There has to be a reason. He paused, breathing with difficulty, then took Reed's hand. Son, I lived a life built on violence. I built this empire, held it, expanded it, but I lost many other things. Your mother left because she couldn't bear this life. I have no friends, only allies and enemies, and I grew old alone. Harrison tightened his grip on his son's hand. If there is someone who makes you want to live differently, don't let that slip away. That is the thing I regret most. Reed looked at his father, and he no longer saw the powerful kingpin of years past, but an old man facing the final days of his life and looking back on everything he had lost. He tightened his hold on his father's hand. I understand, father. Harrison smiled, his eyes drifting closed from weariness. Good. Now go. You have work to do. Reed left the hospital with a new resolve taking shape inside him. He would protect June and Willa, not only because of the debt he owed Catherine, but because he himself was beginning to care about them in a way he had never expected. And he would end the threat of Sterling Cross, permanently. But this time, he wanted to find another way. A way that would not require bloodshed. Because perhaps, only perhaps, he was beginning to want to become a different man. A man worthy of the look in Willa's eyes when she gazed at him and asked about the soul of books. A man worthy of the fragile trust June had given him the night before. La Maison sat on the top floor of a skyscraper in the center of the city, a place where only those with money and power could set foot. Reed Calloway stepped into the private room at the back, where Sterling Cross was already waiting. The room had been designed with understated luxury, warm golden light, oak-paneled walls, and a single dining table placed at the center. The two men sat facing each other, with two untouched glasses of whiskey between them, and a tension so sharp it seemed it could be sliced with a knife. This was the rule of negotiation in their world. No guns, no enforcers, only two kingpins and words that could decide the fate of hundreds of people. Cross leaned back in his chair, a mocking smile curving at his mouth. He was 45 years old, his salt and pepper hair combed straight back, the faint scar along his jawbone like a reminder of battles long past. I hear you have a new weakness, Reed, he began, his tone mild but dripping with scorn. A tiny little bookshop and a single mother. Fascinating. Cross took a sip of whiskey, his eyes never leaving Reed. You crossed half the city in the middle of the night for a bookseller. The great Reed Calloway of old would laugh in his own face now. Reed's expression did not change. He had learned to master his emotions when he was still a boy, and he was not about to let Cross see even the smallest sign of weakness. What do you want, Cross? He asked directly, his voice cold and calm. Cross set his glass down and leaned forward. The West District. All of it, plus the Southport. Reed nearly laughed. The West District was the center of his power, where he controlled most of his legal and illegal operations, and the Southport was the greatest source of income in the Calloway Empire. Cross was demanding nearly half of everything he had. You know that cannot happen, Reed replied. Cross tilted his head, and his cloudy gray eyes gleamed with threat. Then perhaps I will pay that bookshop another visit, this time not as a warning. A heavy silence settled over the room. Reed looked into Cross's eyes and saw that the man was not joking. Cross would do exactly what he said. He would go after June and Willa, and this time it would not stop with a fallen bookshelf. Reed placed both hands on the table, his fingers laced together, and spoke in a voice cold as ice. Do you want to know why I care about that bookshop? Cross lifted a brow and waited. Not because of her. Because of her mother. Reed spoke slowly, every word measured with care. 2 years ago, she donated an organ that saved my father's life. She did not know who he was. She wanted no money, no gratitude. She only wanted to save a human life. He paused, letting the words settle into the air. And she died. That bookshop is the only legacy she left to her daughter. Reed leaned forward, his gray eyes hard as steel. If you touch it again, I will not negotiate. I will level everything you have. The East District, your warehouses, your men, all of it. He let the threat hang between them. And you know I don't make threats, Cross. I make promises. Cross studied Reed with a searching look. He had lived in this world long enough to know when a man was bluffing and when a man was telling the truth. And Reed Calloway was telling the truth. He could see it in those cold gray eyes, in the way Reed sat perfectly straight without the slightest hint of hesitation, in the steady voice that never wavered. If Cross attacked that bookshop again, Reed would go to war. Not a war for territory or power, but a war for vengeance. And Cross knew that Reed Calloway never took revenge by halves. At last Cross spoke, and the mockery had faded from his tone. An expanded East District, that is my condition. Reed was silent for a moment, weighing it. An expanded East District was a significant concession. But it was not the backbone of his empire. He could accept it. Fine. He nodded. In return, that bookshop and everyone connected to it will never again appear in your sights. Never. Cross took a sip of whiskey, the first real sip since the negotiation had begun. Fine. But remember this, Reed. If you betray me, the first place I will come will be that bookshop. Reed rose to his feet and fastened the button of his suit jacket. If you do that, you will not live long enough to regret it. He walked out of the room without looking back. Vince was waiting outside, leaning against the side of the gleaming black car. When he saw Reed emerge, he straightened at once. How did it go, boss? Reed did not answer immediately. He opened the car door and slipped into the back seat. Vince got into the driver's seat and looked at him through the rearview mirror. How long will this deal hold? Vince asked. Reed stared out the window, the city lights streaming backward like blurred ribbons of light. Long enough for me to put everything in order. Long enough for her and the little girl to have a normal life. The next 2 weeks passed in uneasy quiet. Cross remained silent, making no new moves. The men Reed had assigned to watch the bookshop reported that nothing unusual had happened. June and Willa continued their daily routine, opening the shop in the morning, closing it at night, and Reed stopped by from time to time to return the book he had borrowed and borrow a new one. Willa began to grow used to his presence and often asked him about the books he was reading. June still kept her distance, but she no longer looked at him with the same guarded eyes as before. Reed began to think that perhaps everything would be all right. Perhaps he had found a way to protect them without bloodshed. Perhaps this time he had done the right thing. Until the call from the hospital came at midnight, and everything changed once again. The telephone rang at 2 o'clock in the morning. Reed was sitting in his penthouse, reading the book Willa had lent him, Jane Eyre with its brave soul. He looked at the screen, saw the hospital number, and his heart seemed to stop for a beat. Mr. Calloway, please come at once. Your father. Reed did not need to hear the rest. He already knew. Somewhere deep inside, he had known this day would come. He had only not expected it to come so soon. He drove through the sleeping city at a reckless speed, red lights and traffic laws meaning nothing to him now. The hospital corridor was long and cold and white as always, but tonight it seemed longer, colder, and each step he took felt as heavy as though he were carrying the whole world on his shoulders. The 2 bodyguards standing outside the room looked at him with sympathy in their eyes, and Reed knew he had not made it in time. But when he pushed open the door and stepped inside, Harrison was still breathing, weakly, with difficulty, but still breathing. Reed rushed to the bedside and took his father's frail hand in his own. Father, I'm here. I'm here now. Harrison opened his eyes, and though his body was so weak he scarcely had the strength to move, his eyes still brightened when he saw his son. My boy. His voice was only a whisper now, but Reed heard every word as though the old man were shouting. I'm here, Father, Reed said, and his voice trembled in a way he couldn't control. I'm not going anywhere. Harrison smiled, a faint smile, yet one filled with peace. His eyes looked far away, as though he were seeing things Reed couldn't see. I've lived a long life, he said slowly, each word costing him effort as though he were climbing a mountain. I did many wrong things, far too many. I hurt people. I lost what mattered. I lived in darkness for too long. He paused, fighting for breath. But the one thing I did right was having you. Reed felt his eyes burn. He was Reed Calloway, the man who controlled half the city, the one who could look into the eyes of his enemies without flinching, but at this moment, He was only a son about to lose his father. Father. He wanted to say something. Wanted to say that his father would be all right. That he would recover. But they both knew that would have been a lie. Harrison squeezed his son's hand one last time. The last strength of a man who had once been the most feared kingpin in the city. Live in a way that is worthy, my son. Worthy of the sacrifice of the woman who saved me. Worthy of that little bookshop. Worthy of the girl and the child. He smiled, and his eyes slowly drifted shut. Don't disappoint me. Then he closed his eyes, and this time, he did not open them again. The machines around him gave a long, steady tone, cold and merciless, announcing the end. Reed remained where he was, still holding the hand that was already growing cold. He did not know how long he sat there, perhaps a few minutes, perhaps a few hours. Time had no meaning any longer when the person you loved most had just slipped away. The funeral was held the following afternoon, quiet and private, just as Harrison had lived. There was no notice in the papers, no long line of escort cars, only a small circle of the people closest to him standing around the grave in a silent cemetery on the edge of the city. Reed stood nearest of all, dressed in a black suit, his face carved from stone. Vince stood behind him with the most loyal of their men, all of them silent, all of them with heads bowed. Reed watched the coffin being lowered slowly into the ground, and he did not cry. He did not speak. He only stood there like a statue while the world around him went on turning. When the service was over, the others gradually drifted away, leaving Reed alone beside the fresh grave. He remained there, staring at the stone engraved with his father's name, and he did not know what he was supposed to do next. All his life he had always known the next move, but now, for the first time, he was utterly lost. Soft footsteps sounded behind him. Reed did not turn around, but he knew who it was. He recognized those footsteps, light and steady, just like the way she had stood her ground before him on the first day they met. June stepped up beside him and said nothing. In her hands she carried a simple bouquet, white daisies, and a few sprigs of lavender. She laid the flowers on the grave, then stood beside him in silence. After a while, she spoke, her voice gentle as the wind. My mother believed that the one who receives must live well. She did not donate her organ so the recipient could go on doing bad things. She did it with the hope that the person who received a second chance would value it and live a life worthy of it. June looked at the grave, then turned her eyes to Reed. Seeing you beside him, seeing the way he spoke about you in the times I read about him in the newspapers, I think he lived well. He had a son who loved him. She paused, and my mother would have been glad of that. Reed still looked at the grave, but something inside his chest broke open. The wall he had built over so many years, the wall that had kept him strong and cold, the wall that had separated him from the rest of the world, was collapsing piece by piece. For the first time in many years, a tear slipped down his cheek. Only one, but it was the first tear he had shed since he was a boy. He said nothing. June said nothing either. She only stood beside him, and then, gently, she took his hand, only for a moment, a brief touch, warm and quiet. Then she let go and walked away in silence, leaving him alone with his father one last time. But that touch remained with Reed far longer than any words could have. It told him he was not alone, that someone understood, that no matter how deep the darkness might be, there was still light somewhere waiting for him. Reed stood by his father's grave until the sun went down, and when he finally walked away, he carried a new resolve within him. He would live in a way that was worthy of his father, worthy of Catherine, worthy of June and Willa. He would not disappoint any of them. 2 weeks after the funeral, Reed Calloway stood in front of Whitmore and Word's bookshop for the first time since the day his father died. He had spent those 2 weeks putting everything in order, from Harrison's will to the legal formalities, from stabilizing the empire to making certain no one used the vacuum of power to stir up trouble. He had been so busy that he had not had time to stop and truly feel the pain. But now, standing before the little bookshop with its wooden sign faded by time, he felt as though part of the burden was being lifted from his shoulders. The shop had been fully repaired. The bookshelves he had once smashed were now sturdy and new. The glass door gleamed, and inside, the books stood neatly on their shelves like soldiers at attention, ready to welcome him. The afternoon sunlight poured through the windows and laid a warm golden wash over everything, making the small bookshop look like a peaceful refuge in the middle of a noisy city. The bell above the door chimed when Reed stepped inside, and less than 3 seconds later, a small figure came rushing out from the corner of the room. "Uncle Reed!" Willa ran to him, her tiny feet tapping across the wooden floor, and she threw her arms around his leg as though he were the dearest person in the world. Reed stood there, startled by the child's reaction. He was used to people fearing him, avoiding him, or lowering their heads before him. But Willa was different. She tipped her face up toward him, those large amber eyes exactly like her mother's, filled with concern. "Are you sad? Mother said your grandfather went away. Very far away. He cannot come back anymore." Reed knelt down to her height, and he realized that he was smiling, even if only a little. "I am sad," he said honestly, "but seeing you makes me less sad." Willa tilted her head and thought for a moment, as though weighing a matter of great importance. Then suddenly she ran off and came back, holding Mr. Buttons in her hands. "Hold Mr. Buttons," she said, pushing the worn old rabbit into Reed's hands. "When I am sad, I hug Mr. Buttons, and I am not sad anymore. Mr. Buttons will help you." Reed took the stuffed rabbit, and he felt his heart soften in a way he had never expected. This was Willa's most precious possession, the thing she held every night, the thing she never let out of her sight, and she was offering it to him because she thought it would help him feel less sad. He looked at the rabbit with its faded button eyes and fur worn thin by time, then looked back at Willa. "Thank you," he said, his voice gentler than it had ever been with anyone. "But I think Mr. Buttons should stay with you. You need Mr. Buttons more than I do." He handed the rabbit back to her. "I only need to know that you are here. That is enough for me." Willa took Mr. Buttons again, but she kept looking at Reed with worried eyes. "Then when you feel sad, come here, all right? I will let you hug Mr. Buttons." Reed nodded, and this time his smile truly reached his eyes. "All right, I promise." June stepped out from the back room, and when she saw the scene before her, she paused for a moment. Reed Calloway, powerful Mafia kingpin, was kneeling on the floor of her bookshop, talking to her daughter about a stuffed rabbit. The image was both strange and warm in a way she couldn't explain. She came closer, and Reed rose to his feet when he saw her. In her hands was an old notebook, its leather cover worn and its pages yellowed with age. "Reed," she said, her voice carrying a trace of hesitation. "I found this while I was sorting through my mother's things. I think you should see it." She held the notebook out to him. Reed took it, not understanding what it was. He opened it, and inside were lines of handwritten words in the soft, slanting script of a woman. It was Catherine Whitmore's journal. He turned through a few pages, skimming entries about daily life, about the bookshop, about June when she was a little girl. Then he stopped at a page marked with an old ribbon. The date on that page was more than 10 years earlier. "Today I met a strange man," Catherine had written. "I was having trouble with some debt collectors. They came to the shop, threatened me, broke things. I did not know what to do. Then he appeared. I don't know where he came from, but he walked in and looked at those men with an expression that made them step back. He did not need to say much. He only said, 'You go on now. I will handle this.' And I did. When I came back, those men were gone and they never returned. I don't know who he is. I did not have time to thank him, but I will remember his face. One day, I will find a way to repay him." Reed turned the next page, and he froze where he stood. There was a newspaper clipping, and in it, the face of a man had been circled in red ink. Harrison Calloway. Beneath the clipping, Catherine had written, "I found him. Harrison Calloway. Now I know who he is. A businessman, they say, but I know he is many other things besides. That doesn't matter. He helped me when I needed it, without asking for anything in return. One day, if the chance ever comes, I will repay him." Reed stared at the notebook, and suddenly everything became clear. His father had helped Catherine years ago, a small act that he had probably forgotten almost as soon as it happened. Harrison did things like that often, helping one person, clearing a path for another, not because he was kind-hearted, but because that was how he built his network of influence. But to Catherine, it had meant far more than that. She had remembered. She had searched. And when she learned Harrison needed an organ donor, she had not hesitated. She had repaid the debt with her own life. June stood beside him, watching the expression on Reed's face change from confusion to understanding, from understanding to emotion. "My mother always said," she spoke at last, her voice light as the wind, "kindness never disappears. It only travels in circles." Reed looked at her, then over at Willa, who was sitting in the corner of the shop with Mr. Buttons in her arms, reading a picture book. The circle had closed. His father had helped Catherine. Catherine had saved his father, and now he was standing here, in Catherine's daughter's bookshop, watching her granddaughter read beneath the afternoon sun. Perhaps this was not the end. Perhaps it was only the beginning of a new circle. 6 months later, the city gained a new landmark. A modern high-rise rose into the blue sky, its glass facade catching the sunlight like a giant diamond in the heart of the city. This was the project Reed Calloway had pursued for years, the very project that had led him into that little bookshop on that long-ago day and caused so much destruction. But now, as he stood looking at the completed tower, Reed realized that the most important thing was not the soaring floors or the gleaming glass exterior. The most important thing stood at the very center of the main plaza, where a small bookshop with a wooden sign still stood firm amid all the modern elegance surrounding it. Whitmore and Words. June's bookshop. Catherine's legacy. The architect had called it the heart of the project, and the newspapers couldn't stop wondering about the unusual design. Why would a major corporation preserve an old-fashioned little bookshop in the center of a billion-dollar development? Reed never explained. Some stories are not meant to be told to the whole world. On opening day, Reed stood in front of the building in a gray suit, watching the crowd and the reporters gathered around. He had delivered the necessary remarks, shaken the necessary hands, and offered the necessary polite smiles. But the moment he had been waiting for most was when a small figure came running out of the bookshop, curls flying in the wind. "Uncle Reed. Uncle Reed." Willa ran toward him, her little feet moving quickly across the newly laid granite. "Mother's shop is the prettiest. Prettier than that building." She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the bookshop, where June was standing in the doorway. And when Reed saw her, he stopped. June was smiling, not the polite smile she usually offered customers, not the smile that hid the weariness he had so often seen. This was a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes and made her amber gaze shine as though sunlight lived inside it. "Thank you," June said softly when he came near. Reed shook his head. "I did not do it for your thanks." June looked at him, the smile still resting on her lips. "I know. That is exactly why I am thanking you." Vince appeared beside Reed and spoke in a low voice, just loud enough for the two of them to hear. "Boss, Cross has pulled out of the city. Looks like he is expanding his territory somewhere else. He is no longer interested in us." Reed nodded, his eyes still fixed on June and Willa. "Good. Stay in contact, if there is any movement at all." "I understand," Vince replied, then quietly stepped away. Cross was still out there. The threat had not disappeared entirely. But for now, at least, June and Willa were safe, and that was what mattered most. Late that evening, after the opening celebration had ended and the city lights had begun to glow, Reed returned to the bookshop. Willa was asleep upstairs, Mr. Buttons folded in her arms, and the shop had sunk into a gentle and comforting silence. Reed and June sat on the front steps outside the shop, looking out across the new plaza where the lights shimmered against the glass of the tower. They sat side by side in silence for a long while, with neither of them needing to say anything. Then June spoke, her voice soft but filled with quiet seriousness. "Will you leave that world? The Mafia world?" Reed did not answer at once. He looked up at the night sky, where the stars had been dimmed by the lights of the city. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Perhaps not completely. It is a part of me, whether I want it to be or not. It is my father's legacy, the thing I have spent my whole life building." He paused. "But I am building something else now. Something my father wanted to see before he died. Something worthy of your mother's sacrifice." June was quiet for a moment, her fingers absently brushing the edge of the stone step. Then she asked, more softly than before, "And me? Where do I belong in all of this?" Reed turned to look at her, and in those cold gray eyes, June saw something she had never seen there before. Sincerity, gentleness, and perhaps a little hope. "You are the reason I want to change," he said. Silence followed, but it was a warm silence, not a heavy one. June rose and went inside the shop. When she returned, she carried the old leather-bound book, Jane Eyre, the one Willa had lent to Reed, the book Catherine had said possessed a brave soul. "My mother wanted you to have this," June said, holding the book out to him. He took it and felt its weight in his hands. He opened the front cover, and inside, on the inner page, there was a line written in Catherine Whitmore's hand, something he had never seen before. Kindness always finds its way back. They stood facing each other in the evening light, between the little bookshop and the high-rise tower, between the past and the future, between what had been lost and what might still be found. There was no kiss, no declaration of love, only a promise held in silence that they would meet again, that this story was not over, that perhaps, after all the ashes, something was still beginning to bloom. Outside the windows of the bookshop, the city continued moving with all its schemes and secrets. Somewhere, enemies were still waiting in the shadows. Somewhere, debts still remained unpaid. But inside Whitmore and Words, among the old shelves and the scent of yellowed paper, something was growing. Not love. Not yet. Only the possibility of it. And sometimes, that possibility is more than enough. Today's story closes here, but the lesson it leaves behind will continue to echo in each of our hearts. This is a story about kindness, about the way one small act of goodness can create circles that travel far beyond anything we can imagine. Harrison Calloway helped Catherine Whitmore many years ago without asking for anything in return. Catherine remembered and repaid that kindness with her own life. And the circle continued when Harrison's son met Catherine's daughter, when two worlds that should never have crossed found one another between old bookshelves. Life is much the same, my friend. Every act of kindness we plant today may become a seed that blooms for someone tomorrow. We never know where our kindness will go, whom it will touch, or which life it may change. But that is not what matters. What matters is that we continue to give, that we continue to believe this world is still worthy of our kindness. If this story has touched your heart, please press the like button to support our channel. Share this video with the people you love, the people who need to be reminded that kindness is never forgotten. It only travels in circles and will always find its way back to us. And if you have not yet subscribed, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the moving stories we bring you each day. We would truly love to hear your thoughts. What did this story make you think about? Has there ever been a moment in your own life when kindness found its way back to you in the most unexpected way? Please leave a comment below and share your own story. We read every comment and treasure every word you share with us from the bottom of our hearts. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a life filled with joy, and peace in every day ahead. Remember that no matter how difficult life may become, there is always light at the end of the tunnel, and there are always circles of kindness waiting to find their way back to you. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.